Hello friends, let us talk about the essay titled Sir Roger at Home, written by Joseph Addison. Now, Joseph Addison is one of the greatest essayists of English, and Joseph Addison, along with his illustrious friend Sir Richard Steele, they are together. The two of them are remembered as the precursors and champions of periodical essays of the 18th century. And they founded the two periodicals, the Tatler and the Spectator. Now, Sir Roger de Coverley is a fictional character created by Joseph Addison. I have done a video on another essay of Joseph Addison titled Sir Roger at Church, and there I have given a detailed introduction to periodical essays and their very special features. So those who are interested may kindly watch that video. So now let me go on to the present essay titled Sir Roger at Home. So Sir Roger de Coverley is a fictional character created by Joseph Addison, and he was one of the members of the Spectator Club. The other members being Sir Andrew Freeport, Captain Sentry, Will Honeycomb, etc. And this Sir Roger is a very interesting character. He was a gentleman of Worcestershire, and he belonged to a very ancient descent, and he was a baronet. His great grandfather was the inventor of that famous country dance, which is called after him. And our Sir Roger is a gentleman who was very unique in his behavior, but he was a very kind-hearted person, full of goodness and love for others, a true philanthropist. And he remained a bachelor because he was crossed in love by a perverse, beautiful widow when he was young. And he makes his appearance in a number of essays in The Spectator. And his death was reported in essay number 517. The essay opens with a quotation from Horace. The writer goes on to talk about his visit to the country home of Sir Roger de Coverley. So let me read the essay. Having often received an invitation from my friend Sir Roger de Coverley to pass away a month with him in the country, I last week accompanied him thither, and am settled with him for some time at his country house, where I intend to form several of my ensuing speculations. Sir Roger, who is very well acquainted with my humour, lets me rise and go to bed when I please, dine at his own table or in my chamber, as I think fit, sit still and say nothing, without bidding me be merry. So he says, Sir Roger always invites me, very frequently he invites me to spend some time with him at his country home. And finally, the writer, the speaker of the essay, the narrator of the essay, and finally the narrator decides to accept the invitation and go to his country house. And so he goes there and he stays there for some time. And he says that Sir Roger is a wonderful host. He gives me all freedom, lets me relax and be at my comfortable self. He allows me to wake up whenever I want to and go to bed when I want to. I can either dine at his own table or I can have my food in my own room as I think fit. I can sit still. I can keep quiet. He doesn't force me to be merry. He doesn't force his companionship or the companionship of others on him. He just lets him be. When the gentlemen of the country come to see him, he only shows me at a distance. As I have been walking in his fields, I have observed them stealing a sight of me over a hedge, and I've heard the night desiring them not to let me see them, for that I hated to be stared at. And so when people come to Sir Roger receives a lot of visitors, and when people come to meet him, he doesn't introduce them to the narrator because that would be an intrusion into his privacy. So He only shows them at a distance. He just points out to him and says, that there is my friend. And sometimes getting acquainted with people and spending time with strangers, trying to make friends is a burdensome task. And so Sir Roger spares the narrator of all that trouble and just lets him be. And so he says, sometimes when I walk in the fields, I have seen people staring at me from behind hedges because the knight, that is Sir Roger, has told them, has warned them that he doesn't like people to stare, that the speaker, the narrator, doesn't like people staring at him. So they hide behind hedges and fences and stare at and look at him. I am the more at ease in Sir Roger's family because it consists of sober and staid persons. For as a knight is the best master in the world, he seldom changes his servants, and as he is beloved by them, by all about, and as he is beloved by all about him, his servants never care for leaving him. By this means, his domestics are all in years and grown old with their master. So he says, I am more at ease in Sir Roger's family. So he says, I'm very comfortable in Sir Roger's family because all the people in Sir Roger's family are sober and staid and balanced people. And people who are always calm and mature. And Sir Roger is the best master in the world, and so he doesn't change servants. He continues to keep the old servants. And he is beloved by all his servants, and so none of them leave him. As a result of which, all his domestics are the servants at home, they're all old people who have grown old with their master. You would take his valet de chambre, the personal for his. So you would take his valet de chambre for his brother. His butler is grey-headed. His groom is one of the gravest men that had ever seen, and his coachman has the looks of a privy councillor. You see the goodness of the master even in the old house dog, and in a grey pad that is kept in the stable with great care and tenderness out of regard to his past services, though he has been useless for several years. So he says, if you look at his servants, his valet de chambre or his personal assistant is almost considered to be his brother. He almost looks like him too. His butler is grey-headed. The butler or the cook is the overseer of the kitchen. He is a grey-headed man who looks like a very respectable person. His groom, the person who is in charge of his horses, the caretaker of his horses, appears to be a very serious man. And his coachman looks like a privy councillor. Privy is a council that advises the kings and ministers. So his coachman has the appearance of a privy councillor. So what he intends to say is that all these people have been there with him, with Sir Roger, for so many years, that some of his elegance and his dignity has rubbed off on them too, and they all behave like gentlemen of high esteem. Even his coachman and the caretaker of his horses, all of them are true gentlemen who behave with such dignity and calm. And so he says, even you can see the goodness of the master even in his old house dog. Even the dog at the house is an old one. But he doesn't, he takes care of it because it has been there for a long time. Just as a grey horse in the stable, which is now out of service. It is useless, it is weak, but then it is taken care of out of regard for his past service, for all the years of service that he had rendered. It is taken great care of. So you see that Sir Roger is such an affectionate person who is genuinely interested in all the people and the animals who have been part of his life. I could not but observe with a great deal of pleasure the joy that appeared in the countenances of these ancient domestics upon my friend's arrival at his country seat. Some of them could not refrain from tears at the sight of their old master. Every one of them pressed forward to do something for him and seemed discouraged if they were not employed. So he says that it is such a pleasure to observe the joy that these people expressed when they saw Sir Roger de Coverley after a long time. Because Sir Roger used to spend a lot of time in London too. And after a long absence, when he went back to Worcestershire, to his country seat, his servants seemed to be genuinely happy to see him. Some of them were so overwhelmed by their affection for him that they would be all teary eyed. And they would all come forward to do something or the other for him and would feel quite unhappy if they cannot do anything. At the same time, the good old knight, with a mixture of the father and the master of the family, tempered the enquiries after his own affairs with several kind questions relating to themselves. So he behaved like a father to them and like a master, a true master of the family. So when they asked him questions about his well-being, he found time to ask them, inquire about their health and well-being too. This humanity and good nature engages everybody to him, so that when he is pleasant upon any of them, all his family are in good humor, and none so much as the person whom he diverts himself with. On the contrary, if he coughs or betrays any infirmity of old age, it is easy for a stander by to observe a secret concern in the looks of all his servants. So everybody loves him, and when he's happy and when he's pleasant to any one of them, all of them are happy. But on the other hand, if he coughs or if he shows any sign of ill health or old age or infirmity, you can see that all of them display worry and concern. Because a person who stands by and observes can see that any sign, maybe a slight cough or some kind of unease that Sir Roger displays, immediately all his servants, the domestic servants, they're all worried. And the worry, the pain is very obvious in their faces because they don't want him to fall sick. My worthy friend has put me under the particular care of his butler, who is a very prudent man, and, as well as the rest of his fellow servants, wonderfully desirous of pleasing me, because they've often heard their master talk of me as his particular friend. So he says that during this visit to Sir Roger's country house, Sir Roger's country house, Sir Roger had entrusted him particularly to his butler. And this butler and all the servants, they take such excellent care of this visitor because Sir Roger always speaks of him as his very particular friend. My chief companion, when Sir Roger is diverting himself in the woods or the fields, is a very venerable man who is ever with Sir Roger and has lived at his house in the nature of a chaplain above 30 years. This gentleman is a person of good sense and some learning, of a very regular life and obliging conversation. He heartily loves Sir Roger and knows that he is very much in the old knight's esteem, so that he lives in the family rather as a relation than a dependent. So he says, when Sir Roger is busy with something else, either in the woods or in the fields, then the person who keeps me company is the chaplain. He is the pastor of the parish, and he is a very venerable, respectable man who always spends his time with Roger. He has been there for almost 30 years, and he is a very respectable person, a learned man who lives a regular life, and a very polite person. He loves Sir Roger and also knows that Sir Roger holds him in high esteem, and he lives in the family not as a dependent but as a family member. I have observed in several of my papers that my friend Sir Roger, amidst all his good qualities, is something of a humorist, and that his virtues as well as imperfections are, as it were, tinged by a certain extravagance, which make them particularly his, and distinguishes him from those of other men. So he says that I have noted now, the writer observes Sir Roger keenly and writes about him too. And so he says, amidst all his good qualities, he has noted that he is a humorist, and he also has some extravagant qualities, which are very, very unique to him and which makes him stand apart from the others. This cast of mind, as it is generally very innocent in itself, so it renders his conversation highly agreeable and more delightful than the same degree of sense and virtue would appear in their common and ordinary colors. So he is a very innocent person, and it is very interesting to listen to his conversations. As I was walking with him last night, he asked me how I liked the good man whom I have just now mentioned, and without staying for my answer, told me that he was afraid of being insulted with Latin and Greek at his own table, for which reason he desired a particular friend of his at the university to find him out a clergyman rather of plain sense than much learning, of a good aspect, a clear voice, a sociable temper, and, if possible, a man that understood a little of backgammon. So he asked him once, while they were taking a walk, he asked him about this chaplain or the pastor that he just mentioned, and asked him, what do you think about him? Do you like him? And he told him how he had asked a friend of his at the university to recommend a person, to find a clergyman for him who was not a very learned person or a great scholar who would bewilder Sir Roger with his Latin and Greek. Instead, he just wanted a clergyman who was a very sensible person, not a very learned scholar, a man of good character and a clear voice, because a clergyman has to talk to his congregation, he has to make sermons. So he wanted a man with a clear voice, a sociable temper, that is a very friendly person, and also, if possible, an additional requirement, a person who can play backgammon. So backgammon is a board game played by two people with the dice and other pieces. And so that was an additional requirement, because Sir Roger was fond of backgammon, and he said it would be nice if this person, along with all the other qualifications, also knew how to play backgammon. That is how he was introduced to this particular person, and this meeting took place about 30 years ago, and this person had continued to live with him and be there in the parish. So now you see, what you see now is what Sir Roger tells the narrator about this man. My friend found me out this gentleman who, besides the endowments required of him, is, they tell me, a good scholar, though he does not show it. I have given him the parsonage of the parish, and because I know his value, have settled upon him a good annuity for life. So he says this person, who my friend recommended, turned out to be a great scholar too, along with all the other qualifications that I had sought. But he doesn't show his scholarliness, he doesn't show off. He's a very humble person, a very modest person, and I have made him the parson of my parish. And because I know how valuable he is, I have also settled a good annuity. I pay him well. I have settled a good annuity for life, because I don't want him to face a want later in his years of infirmity. If he outlives me, he shall find that he was higher in my esteem than perhaps he thinks he is. So if he outlives me, he will find that I have, taken good care of him, and I have seen to it that he will live a comfortable life even if I am not there. He has now been with me 30 years, and though he does not know I have taken notice of it, he has never in all the time asked anything of me for himself, though he is every day soliciting me for something in behalf of one or other of my tenants, his parishioners. So he says, this man is such a selfless man. He has been with me for 30 long years, but not once has he asked me for a personal favor. But every day he asks me for favors for others, some favor for his parishioners, but not once something for himself. Such a selfless person. There has not been a lawsuit in the parish since he has lived among them. If any dispute arises, they apply themselves to him for the decision. If they do not acquiesce in his judgment, which I think has never happened above once or twice at most, they appeal to him. So he says, after he became the parson of this parish, there has been no disputes here. Any dispute is taken to him, and his decision is accepted. And in the very rare cases, just once or twice, when people have not agreed to his judgment, the case has been brought to me, the dispute has been brought to me. And that is very, very rare, just once or twice in all these 30 years. At his first settling with me, I made him a present of all the good sermons which have been printed in English, and only begged of him that every Sunday he would pronounce one of them in the pulpit. So he says, once he settled down with me as the parson, I gave him a present of all the English sermons, all the sermons of famous clergymen and preachers. So I gave him a gift of those sermons, and requested that every Sunday he use one of them or pronounce or read out one of them in the pulpit. Accordingly, he has digested them into such series that they follow one another naturally and make a continued system of practical dignity. And over the years, over these long 30 years, this person has read these sermons and has added his own personal touch to them, and he renders them in such a beautiful and commonsensical manner to the parish. Now, this is what Sir Roger tells the narrator about this man. As Sir Roger was going on in his story, the gentleman we were talking of came up to us, and upon the knights asking him who preached tomorrow, for it was a Saturday night, told us the Bishop of St. Asaph in the morning and Dr. South in the afternoon. He then showed us a list of his preachers for the whole year, where I saw with a great deal of pleasure Archbishop Tillotson, Bishop Sanderson, Dr. Barrow, Dr. Calamy, and several living authors who have published discourses of practical dignity. I no sooner saw this venerable man in the pulpit, but I very much approved of my friends insisting upon the qualifications of a good aspect and a clear voice. For I was so charmed with the gracefulness of his figure and delivery, as well as the discourses he pronounced, that I think I never passed any time more to my satisfaction. A sermon repeated after this manner is like a composition of a poet in the mouth of a graceful actor. So here he mentions some names: Bishop of St. Asaph, Archbishop Tillotson, Bishop Robert Sanderson, Dr. Isaac Barrow, Dr. Edmund Calamy. All these were eminent clergymen who lived during the times of the kings Charles I and Charles II. They were great scholars who made very popular sermons. And so the narrator tells us that the next day, on Sunday, he went to the church, he attended the sermon, and it was a pleasure watching and listening to this person on the pulpit. And because then he understood why his friend Sir Roger insisted on this person having a good aspect and a clear voice. So he was a reasonably good looking man and he had a clear voice. So listening, and he delivered the sermon with such grace that it was sheer pleasure watching him and listening to him. And so he says, I spent my time to my utmost satisfaction. A sermon repeated after this manner. So he says that he repeated the sermon of one of these great men. And he says, listening to the sermon, to the famous sermon, being delivered with personal additions of this priest, was like listening to a poem, a beautiful poem, delivered by a graceful actor. So he received the same kind of pleasure of listening to a famous poem being recited by a good actor, by a very articulate actor. So he enjoyed the sermon at the church. I could heartily wish that more of our country clergy would follow this example, and instead of wasting their spirits in laborious compositions of their own, would endeavour after a handsome elocution and all those other talents that are proper to enforce what has been penned by greater masters. This would not only be more easy to themselves, but more edifying to the people. So he says that he expresses his opinion that this is actually a commendable thing, that, and he would advise more country clergymen to follow this example, because it is not easy for ordinary people to deliver interesting or good sermons. Oftentimes we hear of people complaining about boring sermons and falling asleep in the church. He says it would be a good practice, on the other hand, to follow the sermons of great masters and to deliver them in the church. It is easy for the clergyman, and at the same time, it is edifying. It is really useful and uplifting for the people who listen to them, because they contain a lot of knowledgeable information. Listening to the sermons of eminent clergymen, spiritual leaders, would definitely improve their character and also make them better human beings. So he feels that this practice, which has been started by Sir Roger de Coverley, is a very good one, and it should be followed in other parishes too. So this is what he writes in this essay titled Sir Roger at Home. So you see how he reveals the character of Sir Roger as a wonderful human being who is loved by all and who loves all those around him, who spreads so much of happiness and light and goodwill. And the people surrounding him too are of similar vein. So you see a lot of wonderful characters in this essay. And the essays of Joseph Addison and Richard Steele were very popular during those times, because these essays about real characters, about people who you find living amongst yourselves, they appealed to the common people, because that was a time when most of the works centered around politics and civil wars and all that. And so it was such a pleasure for common people to read about people like them, to read about the theatre, to read about books, to read about common tastes and fashions of the time. So that is why the Spectator and the Tatler was so popular. And Sir Richard Steele and Joseph Addison will forever be remembered as greatest contributors to English periodical essays and to the English novel, because it was the periodical essays which nurtured the habit of reading and encouraged more people to write in the parlance of ordinary men, and it led to the rise of prose and the novel. I sincerely hope that your acquaintance with this particular essay would inspire and encourage you to seek and read more essays written by Addison and Steele, because they surely would make such pleasurable reading. And I'm sure you would enjoy reading the essays of Addison and Steele just as I enjoy them. Thank you for listening to me.